My name is Alara Vance. I'm 34, and for the better part of my adult life, I've navigated two separate worlds. In one, I am a major general in the United States Army, a strategist responsible for the lives of thousands. In the other, the world inhabited by my own family, I have been, until very recently, simply Alara, who's doing something in the Army. For 15 years, my father, a man who built his life on the power of ideas, saw my chosen path not as a career, but as a quiet failure, a deviation from the life of intellectual rigor he believed was my birthright. I never corrected him. I never mentioned the commendations, the difficult commands, the promotions that came faster than anyone expected. I wanted his respect for the person I was, not for the stars on my shoulders. I never imagined that my long silence would come to an end at his own retirement gala, with a 4-star general revealing my secret and my father's meticulously constructed worldview shattering before an audience of his peers. If you are reading this from a place where the people you love most struggle to see the value in the path you've chosen, I hope you'll find a piece of your own story here. Let's talk about what it means to find your own north, even when your family's compass points in a different direction entirely. Growing up in the Vance household in the leafy, intellectual enclave of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was to be steeped in the quiet reverence of the mind. Our home wasn't one of loud declarations, but of nuanced arguments, of books stacked in every corner, of the scent of old paper and brewing tea. Success, in my father's world, wasn't measured in dollars or titles, but in the currency of influence, in the shaping of global discourse from the hallowed halls of academia. My father, Dr. Arthur Vance, was a titan in his field. For 30 years, he was a distinguished professor of international relations at the prestigious Wellesley Institute for Global Studies, a man whose books were required reading in universities across the world and whose opinion was sought by diplomats and policymakers. He believed, with an almost religious fervor, that the world was changed not by armies, but by ideas, not in trenches, but in treatises. From a young age, the paths for his children were charted with the same precision he applied to his geopolitical theories. My older brother, Liam, was destined for the world of innovation and technology. He is now a successful tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, creating algorithms that reshape how we interact with information. My sister, Chloe, with her refined aesthetic and quiet intensity, was guided toward the arts. She is now a respected curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I, Alara, the one who inherited his analytical mind and love for strategy, was meant to be his intellectual heir, to pursue a doctorate and follow him into the world of think tanks and global policy. The military, Alara, he would say during our Sunday dinners, his long fingers steepled as he considered the topic, is a blunt instrument. It is for those who execute policy, not for those who create it. It's a noble sacrifice, I suppose, for those who lack other avenues, but it is not a life of the mind. My mother, Eleanor, an art historian with a gentler, more expansive view of the world, would often try to intervene. Arthur, that's an oversimplification. Leadership in the modern military requires immense strategic and intellectual depth. But my father would simply offer a patient, slightly condescending smile. My dear, one can be a brilliant tactician and still be a pawn in a larger game. The real chess masters are not on the board. The summer after I graduated from high school, I made a choice that set me on a different board entirely. While my father had arranged for me to assist one of his colleagues with research for a new book, I quietly met with an Army recruiter. The woman I spoke with, a sharp, insightful captain named Maria Torres, didn't try to sell me on patriotism or adventure. She listened as I explained my fascination with history, with grand strategy, with the intricate dance of nations. "You think like a strategist, Ms. Vance," she had told me, her words a quiet affirmation. "We don't just need people to follow orders. We need people who can figure out what the orders should be." When I finally told my parents, the reaction was exactly as I'd anticipated. My mother's face was a canvas of concern and reluctant support. My father's expression was one of profound, academic disappointment. "You are trading a life of intellectual creation for one of rote execution," he said, his voice laced not with anger, but with a sorrow that was far more cutting. "You have a first-rate mind, Alara. You are choosing to use it for second-rate work." "I want to serve, Dad," I had replied, my own voice trembling slightly. "I want to understand the world from the ground up, not just from a library." That conversation laid the foundation for the next 15 years. To my father, my career was a phase, a prolonged gap year. He introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter, Alara. She's currently with the Army, exploring her options. The narrative never wavered, not when I graduated from officer candidate school at the top of my class, not when I was deployed for the first time, not when I earned my first command. It was during a Christmas visit early in my career, after I'd been promoted to captain, that I made the decision to retreat into silence. At a holiday party filled with my father's academic friends, he had introduced me with his usual spiel, before turning to praise Liam's latest app and Chloe's newly curated exhibit. Later that evening, one of his colleagues approached me. "It must be so difficult," she'd said with genuine pity, "to feel like you're not quite living up to your family's intellectual legacy." The sting of that comment, born of my father's own narrative, was what sealed my resolve. I would no longer offer up my accomplishments as fodder for his dismissal. My closest friend in the Army, Maya Singh, a brilliant officer I'd met in training, understood completely. "You're building a fortress, Alara," she'd said over a pixelated video call from her post in Germany. "You're not going to let him define the terms of your success." "I'm just tired of fighting a battle I can't win," I'd admitted. But a part of me, the part one rarely acknowledged, held on to a quiet, stubborn hope. I hoped that one day my father would see my commitment, my discipline, my quiet strength, and be proud of me, the daughter, not the rank. And so, my professional life became a classified document. My master's degree in strategic studies, my work at the Command and General Staff College, my commendations for developing a new doctrine for humanitarian aid logistics, none of it was ever mentioned at home. My mother would sometimes ask probing questions, her intuition telling her there was more to my quiet career than I let on, but I would deflect with practiced ease. Meanwhile, my career accelerated in ways I had never anticipated. My ability to analyze complex systems and find unconventional solutions caught the attention of General Wallace Sterling, a legendary four-star general who became a mentor. He saw in me not just a soldier, but a strategist in the mold of the great military thinkers I had studied. Under his guidance, I rose through the ranks. At 32, I was promoted to Major General, the youngest woman in the Army's history to achieve the rank. The promotion was quiet, mostly confined to military circles, and I made no effort to correct the narrative at home. "You have to tell them, Vance," General Sterling had said after pinning the second star on my uniform. "This is a historic achievement. Your family should know." "With respect, sir, they wouldn't understand the context," I'd replied, the old excuse feeling thin even as I said it. The truth was, I was afraid. I was afraid that even this monumental achievement wouldn't be enough to change my father's mind. And a deeper, more stubborn part of me still wanted him to see me, to truly see me, without the blinding light of 2 stars on my shoulders. When the embossed invitation for his retirement gala arrived, my first instinct was to find a reason not to go. 15 years of being a footnote in my own family's story had taken its toll. But my mother called, her voice soft but insistent. "Please come, Alara. It's the culmination of his life's work. The whole family will be here." It would mean the world to him. I agreed, packing my dress uniform and a heart full of weary resignation, never suspecting that the evening would unravel the careful tapestry of silence I had woven for over a decade. The Atherton Club, the August venue for my father's retirement gala, was the physical embodiment of his world. The air smelled of beeswax, old leather, and quiet privilege. Dark wood paneling soared to a coffered ceiling, and portraits of stern-faced university deans from centuries past stared down at the living. It was a place where conversations were held in hushed, confident tones, a fortress of intellect and influence. I arrived in my Army service uniform, the formal dress blues, choosing the version without the full regalia of my rank, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. In a room full of bespoke suits and designer dresses, my uniform still made me an anomaly. "Alara, you came." My mother, elegant in a deep sapphire gown that matched the intelligence in her eyes, embraced me at the entrance. Her hug was a silent acknowledgement of the difficult territory I was navigating. "You look so distinguished, darling." "Thanks, Mom." "How is he?" "He's in his element," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Holding court by the fireplace. Liam and Chloe are with him." Brace yourself. As we approached the grand fireplace, I saw the familiar scene. My father, even in retirement, commanding the space, a glass of single malt scotch in hand, gesturing as he expounded on some point of geopolitical theory. Liam, ever the sleek tech mogul in a suit without a tie, listened with a detached amusement, while Chloe, a study in artistic grace, nodded thoughtfully. When my father saw us, his smile was warm, but it cooled a few degrees as his eyes settled on my uniform. "Ah, Ilara," he announced to the circle of his colleagues. "My soldier has arrived. Couldn't find a civilian outfit for the occasion." Before I could formulate a reply, he turned to a man beside him. "Professor Albright, you remember my youngest daughter, Ilara. She's in the army. Ilara, this is Dr. Albright, head of the sociology department." "It's a pleasure to see you again, Dr. Albright," I said, shaking his hand. "And this is my dress uniform, Dad. It's the appropriate attire." Of course, he said with a dismissive wave. "Albright's nephew is in the Navy, a lieutenant on a submarine. Perhaps your paths have crossed." "The military is a rather large organization, Dad," I replied gently. "It's unlikely." "Well, I'm sure you're both serving the country in your own way," Albright offered with polite condescension. "A noble endeavor." My father checked his ornate pocket watch. "The speeches will begin soon. The Institute has asked me to say a few words." He adjusted his tie. "After decades of lecturing to halls full of doctoral candidates, I think I can handle a friendly room." "More challenging than briefing the Joint Chiefs?" I asked, a sliver of my other world slipping through before I could stop it. He chuckled, a dry, academic sound. "A different species entirely, Ilara. I've advised prime ministers and secretaries of state. They, at least, grasped the theoretical frameworks." He turned back to his conversation, the dismissal as clear as if he'd spoken it aloud. Chloe drifted over to me, a glass of champagne in her hand. "He's at his most theatrical tonight," she whispered. "This retirement is hitting him harder than he lets on. His entire identity is this institute." "I know," I sighed. "I just hoped he might soften a bit." "Dad? Soften?" Liam joined us, a wry smile on his face. "Come on, General," he murmured, so only I could hear. Liam was the only one who knew my rank. He'd stumbled upon an article about me in a defense journal while researching AI applications for military logistics. To his credit, he had been both stunned and deeply impressed, and had kept my secret without question. "Not tonight, Liam," I warned quietly. "Arthur, there you are." A distinguished man with a mane of silver hair approached, his hand extended to my father. "A brilliant career, my friend. Truly." I recognized him as Dr. Jean Holloway, the president of the Institute. "And these must be the brilliant Vance children I've heard so much about." My father beamed, placing a proud hand on Liam's shoulder and another on Chloe's. "My pride and joy. Liam is revolutionizing data analytics out on the West Coast, and Chloe is making a name for herself as one of the most insightful young curators in the country." Dr. Holloway nodded, then his gaze fell on me. "And you, my dear, you've chosen a path of service. We thank you for it." "Just doing my part, sir," I replied. "Ilara has been with the army since she was 18, my father added, his tone implying a lack of progress. "Still finding her footing in the ranks, I believe." I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the slow constriction of breath that came with every casual dismissal. 15 years, and it still had the power to wound. I excused myself and walked toward the bar, needing a moment of space. There, I found Mrs. Gable, my father's administrative assistant for the past 20 years, a woman with a sharp mind and a kind heart. "Ilara, it's been too long." She hugged me warmly. "Your father talks endlessly about Liam and Chloe, but you're a mystery. Still in the army?" "Yes, still serving." "Good for you. What rank are you now?" "I remember you were a lieutenant the last time I saw you." I offered my well-rehearsed, vague reply. "I've moved up a bit since then. The army's been a good career for me." She studied my face with perceptive eyes. "You know, your father is a brilliant man, but his vision has always been a bit narrow. Don't ever let him make you feel like your path is less worthy." "I try not to," I said, grateful for her unexpected kindness. If only she knew. The previous month, I had overseen the largest joint humanitarian aid exercise in a decade. 2 weeks ago, I had finalized a strategic realignment of forces that would affect military policy for years to come. That very morning, before flying to Boston, I had been on a secure video conference with NATO Command. But in this room, in my father's world, I was a perennial underachiever, the daughter who had failed to launch. When the chimes called us to dinner, I found my place card at the family table, situated near the front. My father was seated at the head, already deep in conversation with Dr. Holloway about the Institute's future. As I sat down, I steeled myself for the long evening of tributes to the one man who couldn't see the value in my own life's work. My mother leaned close, her hand covering mine for a fleeting moment. "You look 1,000 miles away, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" I nodded. "Just a long week at work. Anything you can share?" Before I could answer, the lights dimmed, and the first speaker stepped up to the podium. The gala unfolded with predictable pomp and circumstance. Colleagues lauded my father's intellectual contributions, former students sent video messages thanking him for his mentorship, and a slideshow chronicled his journey from a young, ambitious professor to a world-renowned thought leader. Through it all, my father sat with a look of serene satisfaction, a man receiving his proper due. I watched, a strange mix of daughterly pride and personal sorrow swirling within me. I admired his mind, his dedication. I had inherited his discipline and his strategic thinking, but he had never been able to see those same qualities reflected in me. After dessert was served, Dr. Holloway returned to the podium. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce a very special guest who has joined us to honor Arthur. A man who has served our country at the highest levels, both in uniform and as a civilian, and who understands, as Arthur does, the complex interplay between policy and action. Please welcome General Wallace Sterling. My heart stopped. General Sterling? Here? I scanned the room and saw him rising from a table near the back, my mentor, the man who had championed my career. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and I saw a flicker of surprise in his before he schooled his features into a polite smile and headed for the stage. He hadn't known I would be here. After a warm round of applause, General Sterling began to speak, his voice calm and authoritative. I've known Arthur Vance by reputation for many years. His work on conflict resolution was foundational to my own understanding of modern warfare. He is a man who has shaped the minds of those who shape our world. It's an honor to be here to celebrate his career. My father inclined his head, a gesture of respect between two titans from different worlds. But the greatest legacy a person can leave, General Sterling continued, his gaze sweeping the room, is not just in their work, but in their children. In the values they pass on. I've had the pleasure of meeting his brilliant children, Liam and Chloe, tonight. And I happen to know his other daughter, Ilara, quite well. At the mention of my name, my father's posture stiffened slightly. I braced myself. Arthur often speaks about the difference between the thinkers and the doers, Sterling said, his eyes finding my father's. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who is both. A person with the intellectual rigor to devise strategy at the highest level and the courage and leadership to execute it on the ground. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I imagine Arthur must be incredibly proud that his own daughter is one of those rare individuals. My father's expression was one of polite confusion. He assumed Sterling was just being generous, offering a kind but empty platitude about my simple service. I speak, of course, Sterling continued, his voice clear and deliberate, of Major General Ilara Vance, one of the finest strategic minds I have ever had the privilege of serving with. A stunned silence fell over the ballroom. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian carpet. 200 faces, a sea of academic and intellectual elites, turned to stare at me. Liam's jaw was literally hanging open. Chloe looked as if she'd seen a ghost. At the head of the table, my father's face went pale. His expression cycled through utter disbelief, confusion, and dawning shock. He looked at me, then at General Sterling, then back at me, as if trying to reconcile two completely different realities. Major General, my father whispered, the words barely audible but echoing in the profound silence. General Sterling nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Indeed, the youngest woman to ever hold that rank in the history of the United States Army. The architect of the Caspian Doctrine, a framework that, I might add, has saved countless civilian lives and is now being taught at war colleges around the world. He looked directly at my father. Your daughter isn't just a soldier, Arthur. She's one of the chess masters. The silence was finally broken by a collective intake of breath throughout the room. Dr. Holloway, beside my father, looked utterly flabbergasted. And my father just sat there, his glass of scotch frozen halfway to his lips, his carefully constructed world tilting off its axis. 15 years of his narrative, his gentle pity, his intellectual condescension, had just been publicly and irrefutably dismantled by one of the most respected military leaders in the nation. The blunt instrument had just been revealed to be a master surgeon. The silence in the Atherton Club's grand hall was a living thing, thick with astonishment. General Sterling's words hung in the air, rearranging the reality of the room, of my family, of my entire life. I sat frozen at my table, the focal point of 200 pairs of disbelieving eyes. This was the moment I had simultaneously dreaded and, in a secret, rebellious part of my heart, perhaps longed for. It was a complete and total unraveling. Dr. Holloway was the first to recover. He rose, a look of profound shock giving way to dawning respect. General Vance, he said, his voice imbued with a new gravity. Please forgive our ignorance. This is extraordinary. Arthur, you old fox, you never said a word. My father didn't respond. He slowly lowered his glass to the table, his hand unsteady. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a question for which there were no easy words. Major General? The room began to buzz with hushed, excited whispers. Vance's daughter? Did he say General? The Caspian Doctrine. I've read about that. The narrative of the evening had been irrevocably hijacked. Liam finally found his voice, leaning across the table. Okay, even I didn't know it was that big, he whispered, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of shock and brotherly pride. Chloe just continued to stare, her mouth slightly agape, as if seeing me for the first time. My mother's hand found mine under the table, her grip firm and grounding. Her eyes were shimmering with tears, but behind them I saw a fierce, quiet pride that needed no words. General Sterling, having detonated the bomb, gracefully made his way from the podium to our table. Arthur, he said, placing a hand on my father's shoulder. I hope I haven't spoken out of turn. I just assumed you knew. The statement was both an apology and a subtle, expertly delivered checkmate. My father finally managed to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. No. I did not know. He looked at me, the chasm of 15 years of misunderstanding yawning between us. Why, Alara? Why wouldn't you tell me? The question, asked in front of his peers and my mentor, was the emotional core of the entire evening. Before I could answer, Dr. Holloway, ever the smooth administrator, stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a brief intermission. Please, refresh your drinks. He was giving us space, a public curtain for a private reckoning. As the noise level in the room rose, our table became an island of tense, vibrating silence. You have to be kidding me, Chloe finally breathed out. A general? Like a real one? With stars. 2 of them, Liam confirmed, looking at me with newfound awe. I knew you were a big deal, Alara. I didn't realize you were a history maker. Why? My father asked again, his voice stronger now, laced with a complex cocktail of hurt, anger, and bewilderment. All these years, you let me believe. You let all of us believe you were just a captain, a major, just drifting. The pain of that word, drifting, pierced through my shock. I took a deep breath, marshalling the same composure I used when briefing hostile committees. Because it shouldn't have mattered, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but clear. My commitment to service, my choice to dedicate my life to my country, that should have been enough. I didn't want your respect to be contingent on my rank. That's not fair, he shot back, his intellectual pride wounded. How can I respect what I don't understand? You never shared your world with me. You never asked to see it, I replied, the truth of it hanging starkly between us. You made up your mind about my life the day I enlisted, and you never once asked a question that suggested you were open to being wrong. We were no longer in a public space. We were back at the family dinner table, hashing out the old, familiar argument, but this time, the facts had changed sides. General Sterling, who had been standing politely nearby, chose this moment to intervene. If I may, he said, his presence commanding an immediate ceasefire. He turned to me. General Vance, I believe this audience has heard my perspective. Perhaps they would be interested in hearing yours. The suggestion was radical. To speak at my father's retirement gala, to take the stage after my secret had been so dramatically revealed, it felt like a strategic maneuver of the highest order. It was an opportunity to explain, to build a bridge, or to burn one to the ground. I looked at my father, at his pale, stricken face. I saw the man who had taught me to love history, to think critically, to see the world as a complex system of interconnected parts. And I saw the man whose narrow definition of success had caused a rift between us that felt, until this very moment, irreparable. In that instant, my training took over. I assessed the terrain, the objective, the assets at my disposal. The objective was not to win an argument or to humiliate my father further. The objective was understanding. Maybe even, if I was lucky, reconciliation. "I would be honored, sir," I said to General Sterling, my voice steady. As I stood and made my way toward the podium, a hush fell over the room once more. I could feel my family's eyes on me, my father's most of all. I was walking into the most challenging diplomatic engagement of my life. The short walk to the podium was a journey across 15 years of silence. Each step on the plush carpet seemed to echo with unspoken words, with achievements hidden and validations withheld. When I reached the lectern, I rested my hands on the cool, polished wood and took a moment to look out at the sea of faces. They were no longer the smug, condescending academics I had imagined. They were simply an audience, curious and waiting. I adjusted the microphone, the small movement feeling immensely significant. My gaze found my father at his table. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of his usual intellectual certainty. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and calm. "I think it's safe to say this evening has taken an unexpected turn." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, easing the tension. "First and foremost, I want to congratulate my father on a truly remarkable career. For 30 years, from this very institution, he has contributed to the intellectual bedrock of our nation's foreign policy. He taught his students, and he taught his children, to think critically, to question assumptions, and to appreciate the profound power of ideas. And I am deeply grateful for that foundation." I paused, letting the sincerity of my words land. I saw a flicker of surprise in my father's eyes. This was not the attack he might have been expecting. "He also taught me," I continued, "that a life of purpose is a life of service. We just disagreed on the form that service should take. My father's world is one of theory, of shaping the policies that guide our nation. My world is one of practice, of executing those policies on the ground, where the stakes are immediate and human." For a long time, we both saw those worlds as separate, even opposed. I took a breath, choosing my next words with the care of a diplomat negotiating a treaty. The distance that grew between us was a joint failure. A failure of communication. I chose to withhold the details of my career, to build a wall around my professional life. I did it out of a stubborn pride, wanting to be valued for my character and not my accomplishments. I see now that in doing so, I denied my father the chance to understand my world, and I denied myself the chance to benefit from his wisdom. I looked directly at him now. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't let you in. I was wrong to believe that you were incapable of seeing the value in my path. I should have had more faith in the man who taught me to seek truth, even if it's uncomfortable." Something in his rigid posture seemed to soften. My mother was openly weeping now, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "General Sterling was kind enough to mention the Caspian Doctrine," I went on, turning my attention back to the audience. "What he didn't mention is that the core principles of that doctrine, de-escalation, resource prioritization, and long-term cultural engagement, were concepts I first started thinking about right here in Cambridge, listening to my father and his colleagues debate the failures of past interventions. The strategist I am today was born in this world of ideas. I simply learned to apply them in a different arena." I could see the connection clicking into place for people around the room, for my father most of all. I was bridging the gap, showing them that the river of my life flowed from the same spring as his. "A life of service takes many forms," I concluded. "You can serve from a lectern or from a forward operating base. You can shape the world with a pen or with a logistical plan that delivers humanitarian aid to a disaster zone. What matters is the integrity of the commitment. Dad, your commitment to your work has been an inspiration, even when we couldn't see eye to eye. Congratulations on your retirement. Your legacy is not just in your books or your students, It's in the values you instilled in all your children, no matter which path they chose. I stepped back from the podium as a wave of heartfelt applause filled the room. It was loud and sustained, a release of the evening's tension and a genuine show of respect. As I walked back to my table, my father stood up. He didn't wait for me to sit down. He looked me in the eye, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time in my life, he seemed at a complete loss for words. Then, he did something I never could have predicted. In the middle of the Atherton Club, in front of all his colleagues, Dr. Arthur Vance, the intellectual titan, straightened his shoulders, brought his heels together, and rendered me a crisp, formal, and perfectly executed military salute. My training kicked in instinctively. I stopped, stood at attention, and returned it. For a few seconds we stood there, father and daughter, a general and a professor, communicating in a language he had never before deigned to speak. When he lowered his hand, he extended it to me. "We need to talk," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I took his hand. It felt like the beginning of a ceasefire. "Yes, Dad," I said. "I think we do." The rest of the gala passed in a surreal haze. Colleagues of my father, who had earlier offered me polite but distant courtesies, now approached me with a deluge of questions about military strategy, global hotspots, and leadership. I handled the inquiries with professional grace, but my focus remained on the fragile truce established at my family's table. My father insisted we speak privately. He led me away from the dispersing crowd to a small, oak-paneled library off the main hall. He closed the heavy doors, shutting out the world, and for a long moment, we just stood in the quiet, surrounded by the wisdom of ages bound in leather. "Major General," he said again, the title still sounding foreign on his tongue. He sank into a worn leather armchair. "Alara, I have been a fool." The confession, so stark and unadorned, was more shocking than his salute. Arthur Vance did not admit foolishness. "I built a narrative about you in my mind," he continued, looking at his hands, not at me. "It was a comfortable narrative. It explained your choice in a way that preserved my own worldview. The quiet one, the one who couldn't find her place, seeking structure in the rigidity of military life. It was arrogant, and it was blind." I sat in the chair opposite him. "It was a narrative I allowed you to believe." "No," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "You tried. In the beginning, you tried to share things. I didn't listen. I heard what I wanted to hear. I saw what I wanted to see. A father's pride can be a blinding thing, Alara. Especially when he believes he knows what is best. This was the heart of it. Not malice, but a kind of intellectual hubris, a certainty so profound it created its own reality. I've spent my entire life studying conflict," he said with a wry, self-deprecating smile. "And I failed to see the one I was creating in my own family. I analyzed grand strategies of nations, but I couldn't see the one you were brilliantly executing in your own life. I learned it from you, Dad," I said softly. "Long-term objectives. Patience. Quietly building assets until the opportune moment." He let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a sob. "My God. You used my own playbook against me." "I wasn't fighting against you," I corrected him gently. "I was just fighting for myself. For the right to define my own success." He nodded, absorbing that. He was quiet for a long time, the only sound the distant murmur of the last guests leaving. "I would read articles about the changing face of the military," he admitted. "About the need for more adaptable, intellectual leaders. I would discuss it in my seminars. And it never once occurred to me that I was describing my own daughter." He stood and walked to the window, looking out into the Cambridge night. "The Caspian Doctrine. I read the white papers on it. A paradigm shift in stability operations. Brilliant. I even cited it in a footnote for my last book." The absurdity of it all seemed to land on him at once. He turned back to me, his face a canvas of regret. "Can you forgive me, Alara? For 15 years of willful ignorance." The question was not about the rank or the accolades. It was about the lost time, the missed opportunities, the chasm of misunderstanding. "Forgiveness is a process, Dad," I said, echoing the language of his own field. "But I'm willing to engage in diplomatic talks." A real smile, the first genuine one of the night, touched his lips. I'd like that. I'd like that very much." He paused, his expression turning serious again. "I am proud of you, Alara. Not for the stars on your shoulder, though they are staggering. I'm proud of the woman you've become. The leader. The strategist. The person who had the strength and integrity to walk her own path, even when her own father was too blind to see where it was leading. The words I had waited half a lifetime to hear finally settled over me, not with the triumphant fanfare I might have once imagined, but with a quiet, peaceful sense of things finally clicking into place. Thank you, Dad. As we left the library and rejoined my mother and siblings, a new dynamic was already taking shape. The gentle reconciliation had begun. The bridge across our two worlds was far from complete, but the foundational pillars had been set, forged in the fire of a public revelation and cemented by a private apology. The war was over. It was time to start building the peace. 3 months later, I sat on the familiar back porch of my parents' Cambridge home, a mug of tea warming my hands. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across the garden where my father was meticulously pruning his rose bushes, a ritual he'd always claimed helped him think. Our Sunday dinners had become a fixture in my life again, but they were different now. The conversations were no longer a careful dance around the elephant of my career. My father would ask me informed questions about defense policy, not with the air of a professor quizzing a student, but with the genuine curiosity of a colleague.